Wow, since we've been on here. Hey, Donna's Land. Did that pack make it to you, family? Did that pack make it to you? Yeah. Let's see. Why is it not letting me? Let's see. There we go.
What's up? Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you good. What's good, fam?
Nothing much. Hold on, let me get my Beyonce light on.
Okay.
Oh, got my Beyonce light on. We good now.
Is your mama saying I'm ashy? My son came in and he was like, "Yeah, I thought I was exfoliating." Oh, I lost you now. Can you hear me?
All right, here. I was putting.
All right. Well, let me put my wife said I'm a little ashy for the TV. Quick. Okay. All right, honey. Am I good now? Is it good now, honey? Thank you. Well, I appreciate everybody pulling up. We are about to get into one of the books I think I've waited for all of my life as a Mississippian. This is The Movement Made Us by David Dennis Jr. In collaboration with David Dennis Sr., his father. I'm gonna read your.
Got me anxious, boy. You was in there marking. Huh?
Yeah, that's my thing, man. That's my thing. There's just so much in there. There's so much in there that I didn't know, and so much that I knew, and then things were connecting in ways that I didn't expect. Let me read your extensive bio first, and then we'll. Okay, so for the uninitiated, David Dennis Jr. is a senior writer. It's Anscape now, right? It's not the Undefeated. Yeah. So it's Anscape. His work has been featured in Atlanta Magazine, The Atlantic, Washington Post, The Huffington Post, among other publications. Dennis is the recipient of the 2021 American Mosaic Journalism Prize, is a National Association of Black Journalists Salute to Excellence Award winner, and was named one of the Roots 100 Most Influential African Americans of 2020. He currently lives in Georgia with his wife and two children, and is a graduate of Davidson College with the Stephen Curry, right?
Yep.
Yeah. He makes it look Stefferless.
Clint Smith also in that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Y'all were doing the thing over there.
Yeah.
Okay. And like I said, we're talking about The Movement Made Us, Father, a Son, and a Legacy of a Freedom Ride, a book that combines the stories of his father, civil rights activist David Dennis Sr., with letters from himself being David Dennis Jr., to create what I think is like a journalistic excursion through memory, history, and reflection on the after effects of both. How you feeling?
Man, it's been a wild 2 weeks, man. It's been a crazy 2 weeks.
Yeah.
Feel good, man. We had like really good events in New Orleans last week, which I mean, it filled me up. Like I didn't know what to expect on these things, but it's like all these movement folks showed up. Louisiana Black Panther Party came in there full, leathered out.
Yeah.
Folks just been filling us up, man. We're going to Jackson tomorrow.
Yes.
I feel good. A little sleep, a lot sleepy. We're doing. I just started doing Around the Horn, and like that's a whole new experience too. So everything's happening at the same time. Like one is sort of distracting me from being anxious about the other one. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
Riding with it, man. So
Word. Good. Well, back to kind of like what I was talking about with the tabs, man. Like, being here, I live in Hattiesburg,
right.
so like really the second half of the book is like talking about my stomping grounds, and it mentions my home city of Natchez, and I used to show the eulogy in class when I taught African American studies last year, and come to find out, well, actually, year before last. Come to find out, Cheney's grandson is in the class
Wow.
with me,
Okay.
watching, yeah, watching it. And I'm gonna shoot you the picture. He was at the protest when they were protesting the mayor and pedal a little while ago.
Mhm.
But he has this amazing, beautiful poster.
Wow.
Yeah, of his granddad that he and I think his mom might have been out there.
Uh,
But yeah, I was like, man, it's just wow how history's kind of sitting on top of us.
right. Yeah. Wow. Yeah.
Yeah.
Story of we met his, I want to say like 20 years ago. They did, I think it was Vogue or somebody, Cosmo, somebody story on her and her story, and so, I mean, it was such a fascinating. I mean, she was born, I want to say, the day before, or the day
Hmm.
right around when
Yeah.
he missed. Um, and they had to hide her because the white folks were still coming after her.
Yeah.
After,
Yeah.
when she was a baby, they were still coming after her, and they were trying to had to keep it sort of secret to make sure that she protected and get her out. It's crazy.
Uh-oh, you cracking in and out. I wonder, is he sounding good for you guys? Y'all let me
Y'all let
know
me
in the
know in the
chat.
Hold up.
Hold on.
All right, am I better now?
Yeah, you better not. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah,
All right.
yeah. But yeah, you were saying that they still kind of had to hide. I think it's 10 days before, because I was doing some recon. I think it was like 10 days before he was murdered. But yeah, he was the grandson is actually pretty darn good at basketball.
Okay.
Yeah. He's the real deal down here. He's playing, I think, at PRCC right now.
Okay.
And he's thinking about switching to football. But yeah.
Wow.
So, how did you come into writing, and how did you come into writing this particular book? We'll do the softballs, and then we'll get
Okay.
into
Yeah. I want. Yeah. Give me the real. I want that. I want to see what them bookmarks are. Like this book. I mean, I'd always sort of been writing. I've been
Yeah.
writing forever. Um, this book has always been on my mind. You know.
Hmm.
Um, and in high school, I didn't really know what a memoir was growing up. A lot of memoirs sort of like, I don't know. I feel like we don't get memoir a lot as kids. You get
Yeah.
biography, you get fiction. And so I was sort of like, biographies are boring to me as a kid. you know,
Yeah.
it was like you get the first. You got to do all this in between stuff, and I was like, it seemed to bore me. But my high school teacher, we read The Things They Carried,
Hmm.
which was the war book from the early '90s about Vietnam, and it's like these short episodic stories, right? And I
Hmm.
was, I think that's what I want to do. I was like,
Yeah.
that's what my dad's stories, write these like short stories, skip around, do all that stuff. Um, it had really just always been on my mind. I always sort of knew I was going to do that. Like I found when I was last week we had an event in Atlanta, and I had a one of my friends from college. Her mom was like, "I remember when you were in college, you were telling me you were gonna write this book," which is sort of crazy.
Yeah.
And so it was always sort of there in the back of my head, but you know, I had in my head I was going to write some books first. Like I was going to
Hmm.
write a book before I did this one, right? But
Yeah.
got like that. My dad's 81 now, so it was getting up there, and it just felt super urgent with everything going on. And so I was like, let's do this. And I had to learn how to write this type of book from scratch as I was doing it on the job, and that was really terrifying and like different, but we just had to work it out. But that's really how it came to be.
Yeah. I could only imagine just how. I mean, because you want to get it right, you
Mm,
know. I was thinking about that in the prologue. You were talking about how sometimes things would jar his memory,
mm,
and sometimes he kind of was, of course, running away from some of the memories, and you have to like polish it up,
mm.
right? And I know you kind of want to get that right. So let's get on into some of the deep stuff.
All right.
Um, in the prologue, you do an excellent job of showing the way your father has worn the years and how those years wore on the family as well. You describe his process of collapsing in on himself, so much so that you realize that he hadn't reckoned with any of these wounds until your youth.
Mm,
This reckoning, according to your father, saved his life going back to the movement, but it also simultaneously wrecked yours. When you were thinking about this, what were the thoughts that were kind of going through your head? The fact that the movement is what he felt like saved his life, while you're like there, you know, and your life is kind of being wrecked by the saving of his.
Yeah, I mean, I was this was something that I sort of didn't realize till we started working on the book. You know,
Mm-hmm.
I mentioned in the prologue, like I had thought that my dad did movement work, and then he just sort of kept on marching. And like I was born, he kept. But what I learned is that when we moved to Mississippi, it was his first time sort of coming back to the movement. So he was a guy finding himself as I was a kid looking for my dad. You know,
Yeah.
that created, and learning that really, like I relearned my childhood and like contextualized my childhood. And like growing up, I had thought that that if you were going to be in the movement doing movement work, then probably like I kind of thought you can't be a good parent if you're going to be doing movement work.
Yeah.
Like if I'm willing to risk my life and risk my family, like once your family becomes expendable, then it's hard for you to be the type of parent you need to be. That was my thinking at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's sort of what this book, my journey through this book is like figuring out how to be in this space of trying to get us free, but also trying to be the best person you can for your family too,
Yeah.
without being this sort of like, all right, we're just going to sacrifice everybody, because that was the thing. Like I wanted to be, a better parent than my dad was, better parent and husband, but I also want to, you know, be part of this movement work. And it was really sort of attention to me because I just didn't know how to make that work.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
and so, yeah, so that's what that was. So this was like a whole, that part was the type of soul searching I didn't anticipate doing this book. I thought, like, I went into the book thinking I had it, kind of had our like lives mapped. Like I kind of knew everything, so I just
Mm-hmm.
down. But like discovering new things was the part that was real sort of crazy for me.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. And one person who kind of, I think, sets up that framework for your dad to kind of start looking more into what kind of family man he wants to be is Medgar Evers,
Mm,
right? Your father recalls Medgar not being just as ready to die as the SNCC and core members on page 119. Matter of fact, let me go to it because it's a really elegant thing to think about when you're aware of Medgar's story.
mm,
But he says, that's where we differ. I love us and I want us to be free, but I have a wife and 3 babies at home. The movement will go on without me if it has to. Those babies in my house won't. You know,
mm.
trust me, you'll be less willing to fall in front of bullets when you have to kiss a family goodbye every day. And if not, you're not doing those kids any good anyway, right? In what ways do you think Medgar's thoughts on family influence your father, and in what ways does it influence your understanding of the balance between activism and fatherhood?
Yeah, so that conversation was interesting because that was obviously Medgar talking to dad, but it was
Mm-hmm.
sort of me talking through both of them, like talking through Medgar and thinking about uh, all that family stuff because, my dad was 21, 22, all that before, he was married but didn't have kids. But I'm thinking about myself as like somebody with kids, with a family, and think
Yeah.
more along the lines of Medgar at the time, right? And his thing is like, you know, I think it's important. First of all, let me go back. I think it's important to have that framing because we tell people that Martin Luther King, Medgar Evers sacrificed their lives, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's not the case. Like Medgar Evers wanted to be doing what me and my dad are doing, right? He wanted to
Yeah.
be kids and looking back on all this stuff. They took his life and they took his future from him.
Yeah.
And when people read the book and they see me and dad having this moment, having this come together, I hope that folks also understand there are a lot of folks who did not get that experience, right? And what it means for them to be missing that and why they're missing it. And so I think so. Yeah, so that did influence dad because it did sort of help him think about family, but I think that probably hit him a lot later than at
Mm-hmm.
but it definitely hit me as we were talking about it. Like as we were having that discussion, I was definitely like, I understand what Medgar is saying. I totally understand his desire to live and like you want to be part of this, but look, I got guns in the trunk and I'm going to make sure that I'm coming home to my family because that is most important, you know.
Yeah, yeah.
And I think it's important to look at it like that, and especially like we're looking at this weekend in Buffalo and all this stuff, and these folks, their lives, you know, like they were at the grocery store about to go do something immediately afterwards. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like immediately afterwards. And they can't do that anymore. So I think we need to think about what gets lost when we take these lives, and not that these folks are dying for a cause or, you know, I mean, all this romanticism about it. No, these folks were murdered. So
Yeah.
I think it's important to think about it like that.
Yeah, there's a part, matter of fact, I got it right here because you kind of slid right into this question. But in the prologue, doubling back to the prologue, you said you were writing these words not knowing if America was going to waltz into an autocracy that stripped away our voting rights, and how this country will respond to the greatest national protest for Black lives and the pandemic. You are now touring in the wake of the Roe versus Wade leak
Mm,
and the two mass shootings. One of which you just spoke to. What are you thinking about like right now, and what do you think like your father is thinking about? Because it's almost prophetic because you were
right,
like, you're not knowing how this is going to come out, and in fact, it kind of comes out worse because they're also stripping the Voting Rights Act as we speak, and looking like they're going to bring back some of those crazy tests that you have to take in
right,
the state of Mississippi. They setting up for that.
right.
Yeah, so what's kind of going through your head knowing you were like prophetic in that?
I think what's going through my head right now is actually a lot of hope. Like being out in these spaces and feeling these folks, like feeling the
Hmm.
movement folks and these young folks together. I feel hopeful. Like I want, I want the book to feel hopeful, you know,
Yeah.
um, to make folks understand that these folks in Mississippi, particularly, were the most set upon kids, oppressed folks in the country, or tried to be, they tried to oppress them more than anybody else, and they changed the entire nature of American politics in this country, right?
Hmm.
And so I'm trying, I'm feeling hopeful about it. I'm feeling hopeful even as this stuff happens, and it's depressed. Like I do feel it. Like I try to go back to the stories of the book and feel like, you know what, we will win. We are going to win. You know, uh, it's some days more difficult than others. you know,
Yeah, yeah.
but I keep thinking about the fact that like I want folks to read this and think about what was done in Mississippi in terms of how we got over this stuff, or how we got power, how we want. Like Tate Reeves has a vision for Mississippi, and we're not at Tate Reeves' vision for Mississippi. And the reason we're not at Tate Reeves' vision for Mississippi is because there are Black folks on the ground making sure that that's the case.
Yeah.
And those are the type of things I try to hold on to, because this book was originally a very angry book that was
Hmm.
full of a lot of despair and a lot of like, my dad and his folks did all this, and y'all still elected Trump, and we're still here, and da da da, and y'all are still killing us, and all that. And there was like so much anger, and I felt like that anger stripped away the story. It sort of cheapened the story of what they accomplished, So I had to
Yeah.
change the tenor of the book in that way, and I think it's better for it. And I think that's something that I have to keep in mind, even while we're feeling like sometimes the progress isn't where we thought it would be.
Yeah. 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 I totally agree. There's a scene. I have a friend who works. I think are y'all doing History is Lunch?
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah. 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 I got a friend, Alan Wheat. He works with the Mississippi Department of Archives and History.
okay,
And he always says, when I read this particular passage, it's like it's your dad riding through Mississippi. And he says, I could never get over how beautiful riding through Mississippi can be. When the sun is out, the trees are still, the magnolia flowers are kissing the sky, and the cotton has its hands lifted to the heavens. The whole state can feel like God taking a deep breath. Now, I don't know whether that was some polishing or your dad just super poetic, but that the whole state can feel like God taking a deep breath. That's heavy right there.
that was all me. I did that. That was
That
me.
was you right there, yeah.
Dad can't get down. That was me. I threw that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And so I'm thinking about like this beauty because me and Al used to do a podcast about like how we wanted to show like even even though there was all this ugly history,
Mm,
right? There's still this beauty of grassroots organizing, folks like getting to it,
mm,
and even still though, demons roam,
mm.
right? Like even while on that ride, he was being haunted by what those trees have been
Mm.
used for. How did you think the ugly of the past gets in the way of the possible beauty of Mississippi?
I think it's the way people frame that past and think about it.
Mm-hmm.
People, I'm sure you've heard it too. I'm never going to Mississippi. I'm never
Mm-hmm.
so racist, da da da. And when I went to school, I heard that a lot. But like, I never thought about me carrying the history of racism in Mississippi. I always thought about me carrying the history of resistance wherever
Yeah.
I always thought about carrying Core and Snick and, Medgar Evers and Mrs. Hamer and C.O. Chin and all these other folks with me wherever I went. So I wasn't ever thinking about like shame or like the Mississippi is this place where you hold this terror. Like that's not for me to like, that's what the white Mississippi to be ashamed of. Like they should be ashamed of that. And they should go around whenever they go. Like I'm sure white folks don't go to New York and somebody say, "Oh, you're from Mississippi. Why would you ever be there?" You know,
Mm-hmm.
oh, your cousins are racist. You know what I'm saying? Like they don't
Yeah.
have that guilt in the way that they expect black folks to feel. And so I don't feel it. I feel the beauty of Mississippi. Like I know what we got to work past and we got to work for, but I also know that I come from a tradition of folks who led, some of the most powerful resistance work that we've ever seen in this country. And I'm gonna choose to carry that. And I find the beauty in that more so than finding something to be ashamed of.
Come on now. Yeah. Yeah. And I think like I was when I was talking to Chinese grandson last night, because I finished like the last half last night
Uh-huh.
like 3 in the morning, and I'm working up my questions, and I'm crying
Uh-huh.
because that when I rewatch, I had it playing on that last part where your dad is doing this in and out oscillation
Mm-hmm.
between the speech that you had posted a few days ago with the eulogy. And I'm telling him, like, man, I wish I had this book when y'all were here,
Uh-huh.
because some of these names, this book does the work of bringing them back to life.
Right.
And I think that's just super important because now these kids can kind of carry that spirit of resistance. Because I think sometimes, and this leads into the next question, but like sometimes we romanticize, the past and then project that romanticism on the contemporary, right? And because of that, we will say like these kids don't kind of care
Right.
like kids in the past used to, when it's like our generation's job to
Mm-hmm.
pour into them in the same way the generation prior to us did. And so all day today, because we're at the end of school,
Mm-hmm. Right.
and so all day today, I'm like, yo, y'all need to I got this book named Hattiesburg
Uh-huh.
that it talks about all these places. But then there's also this other, like, this other Mississippi that's in this new book, The Movement Made Us. And one of the things that I love in here is that the movement didn't come to Mississippi. Mississippi was the movement, right? And I took that to mean, I mean, you go in deeper with it, but I took that to mean like there were all these groups
Mm-hmm.
already here doing the work, and not like traditional groups. We're talking sex workers, we're
Mm-hmm.
talking sharecroppers, we're talking bootleggers. Like,
Yeah.
what is it like bringing that Mississippi to life for the reader?
Yeah. That was definitely really the only way Dad was going to do this book,
Yeah.
was that he was like, if we're doing this, we got to talk about the folks who's not going to be in the history books.
Mm-hmm.
And that was extremely important to him. And I was like thinking to myself, all right, well, how am I going to work all these folks in the book? Well, it turns out it's easy because you can't tell the story without them. Any
Yeah.
story that doesn't have folks in them is an incomplete story.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, like Miss Lennon Woods out there in Hattiesburg, who had her lodging
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
and her importance to the movement work. This sort of came out of the idea we were talking about the contemporary. you know, Dad wanted to highlight these people, but I saw a utility in highlighting them and the fact that, you know, we talk about. I feel like now there's sort of romanticism, but also like a barrier between that folks are like, well, I got tear gas, or I was out in the street and I did this and you didn't do that, and it's like, well, that's not good for anybody. You know, like we should just like let folks do whatever they can do, and it's important to note that every single person, like you said, from the bootleggers to the corner boys to sex workers to the sharecroppers to the teachers to the rich folks, we're doing something, right?
Yeah.
So I think it's important to highlight that because that's what, you know, it was everywhere, you know, and
Yeah.
Mississippi was the movement is like, you know, there's a historical inaccuracy that folks believe that SNCC and CORE came down to Mississippi and liberated a whole bunch of black folks who were sharecropping and didn't know what to do and were lost. But SNCC and CORE folks just came to Mississippi and were like, oh, this is what y'all doing? Like, how can I help? You know, and they were like,
Yeah.
oh,
Yeah.
doing this thing. How can I amplify this thing y'all are doing? Like Ella Baker had already made her way through Mississippi, you know, long before Dave Dennis and Bob Moses came here. You know, Medgar Evers was already in here, you know, investigating Emmett Till and all that stuff
Mm-hmm.
before Dave Dennis and Bob Moses came here. Amzie Moore was mobilizing before they came here. All across the state, there were already movements, and in every state, there that like
Yeah.
wherever black folks who are thriving and alive or just alive, wherever you see black folks in this country, there are people who are mobilizing on a local level to make sure that that's the case. And I think, you know, sometimes when we look at what's going on now, sometimes we'll see a place like Ferguson and national folks will come in and say, I need, you know, this, I'm taking over. But we know about Mike Brown because the local folks were amplifying that voice. And I think that, you know, I didn't want to do a old civil rights man wags his finger and tells you what to do. But I hope that folks can glean that at least that concept out of it, that you go into a place, you knock on doors and see what movement's already happening, and you sort of find a seamless integration into that instead of trying to take some stuff over.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Like what's her name? Lenola Woods. Her, like you said, her establishment, and I'm from Natchez, and you know, we had Nellie's.
Uh-huh.
And so it was so cool to read the way that she kind of wielded. Nellie called hers the Black Book, right?
Uh-huh.
Just these people who you know, they came in and they preferred the I think Mrs. Wood said the darker pleasure, right? But then they go back out,
Uh-huh.
right? And then they, you know, Grand Wizard so and so,
Right.
right? And how those women like stood in the gaps. There's a part in your father's acknowledgments where he says we shouldn't be mentioning any male names without always mentioning some of the female names. There's no reason you should know about Medgar and not know about Fannie Lou
Mm-hmm.
Hamer. And I think that's so important because they stood in the gaps and they still stand in the gaps so much. Something that you mentioned that I think is also important and kind of hovering around this romanticism part is I've seen a lot of people talk about, you know, folk like the corner boys and you know, gang members, right? In response to when we see like shootings
Mm-hmm.
and various things. And what I want to kind of talk about here is something that just really just stuck out to me is that activism and movement work is coalition work,
Mm-hmm.
right? And it entails like an activation. I think I had Tamika Mallor on, and she was like, you know, I'm an activist, but I have to activate
Mm-hmm.
in these places. You said in your book, I already mentioned it, but movement work is coalition work, and coalitions are collectives.
Mm-hmm.
One thing that was super important to your father and a lot of workers in the movement were activating the communities they were serving, meaning, like you said earlier, those communities are already there, and then you just kind of put them together and help them organize what they're doing on a larger scale. I see far too often people in like, you know, real rapid fire Facebook statuses and tweets say, well, why aren't they, you know, aiming at these other people? But I think that's because they haven't been necessarily activated. Because if you're looking at your father's story,
Mm-hmm.
if you know anything about Mega's story, today I talked to my Masonic Lodge members, because I remember us talking about how Medgar would activate the Prince Hall Freemasons and let them know he was in town. Do you feel like this generation has an issue with properly activating these type of fringe communities, or do you think we have a tendency to romanticize activation in general?
Oh, that's a good question. I don't
The
know.
question God.
Yeah, that was a good question. I don't know, man. I think that one of the issues that folks have is not understanding what everybody's place in the movement work is.
Yeah.
You know, um, and I think that, like we talk about Medgar, he knew, the corner boys were doing what they were doing, but they were also making sure they knew those license plates of
Mm-hmm.
in that neighborhood that did not look like they belonged there.
Yeah.
Um, those, the corner, even the street folks in Shreveport, and like
Mm-hmm.
the sex workers, my dad, my dad's stepfather, the
Stepfather, jitney driver. Yeah.
driver, like there was, I think one thing is that sometimes people feel like you have to be one kind of way if you want to do movement work,
Mm-hmm.
and you're educated, that like you got to meet folks where they are, and what
Yeah.
they, and how they, like you may have somebody who, I'm sure you've got students who know things, but they don't know they know it because it hasn't been presented to them in the way that they understand it. Like
Absolutely.
there are folks, like there are kids who may not understand hip hop as an activist space
Yeah.
because they may understand like, oh, this dude's talking real, spitting facts. But what does that mean for him to spit those facts in public? You know what I'm saying? And I think that's one of the things that folks think you have to be one sort of way when it comes to movement work and not understanding where that work exists in that space and just finding folks where they are. Like
Mm-hmm.
I think the measure oftentimes the measure is, again, like I said, did you march? Did you get tear gas? Did you get arrested? Did you do that? And that's one way, but like, Don Hubbard is a perfect example. Like he was New Orleans Corps and he was like, look, I got a job. I cannot get arrested. You know what I'm
Yeah.
saying?
Yeah.
Like, I ain't getting arrested. I ain't gonna lose.
Yeah.
I'm making, I think, $10 a week or something crazy like that. Like I'm doing
Mm-hmm.
driving cars. I'm not gonna get arrested. Meet him where he is. You know what I'm
Yeah.
saying? Are you not gonna get arrested? Can you just move, and drive these cars? And so I think we need to sort of open up a little bit and diversify what we think movement work looks like and meet folks where they are.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Um, Now, and we've touched on this, and so I definitely want you to kind of expound on it. You just mentioned it, and we mentioned it a little bit earlier. But in your first letter, because you are in talks with the ghosts that your dad is drudging up, right? And in your first letter, you take aim at the notion that activism requires being beaten and jailed.
Mm.
You tell your father that you hate that he allows this notion to torment him because being beaten and jailed and killed isn't part of activist work. It's part of white supremacy reacting to activism. Can you describe how you came to realize this and why you felt it was important to not only, inform your father of, but also to kind of speak to when you're looking at what's going on right now?
Yeah, so this comes out of it's not an argument or disagreement. It's like I guess a philosophical debate that me and my dad have, right?
Mm-hmm.
And his belief is that his movement work started when he was doing the Freedom Rise. He was willing to die, right?
Mm-hmm.
But prior to that, he'd spent months going to core meetings, helping train folks for sit-ins, helping make picket signs and all that stuff. And to me, that's the beginning of his movement work, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so one thing that I think Dad does is because of the survivor's guilt sort of sometimes minimizes what he has done in this movement work. And so I think, and I carried that too, to be fair. Like I carried that too with Ferguson.
With Ferguson, yeah. Mm-hmm.
I wanted to stay home and like we talked before, like be a good dad, be a good husband. I didn't go to Ferguson. I was like, oh my God, I've let people down. I haven't done the movement work and things like that. All my friends are getting tear gas and all these friends are getting beaten and all this stuff. And I'm like, and my therapist helped me out with this too, to be honest. And just like, why am I measuring my contribution based on the horrible things that happened to me?
Mm-hmm.
And but I have no control over that, and that's not something that should be part of our calculus for movement work. It's not about what them white folks did to me. They should hold that. They should be
Yeah.
that think about what they're doing to us for getting free. What I should just think about is just what I am doing, how I'm contributing, and whatever they do, that should be something for them to talk about. Like that shouldn't factor into how much I feel like I'm doing, because then we get into this space where I haven't absorbed enough trauma to consider myself part of this thing, and you start measuring what you've done based on the traumatic things that have happened to you, which is, that's an appetite for destruction right there.
Yeah. Yeah. Both. I think both personally and like for whatever like group you're in, right? I think, and I wonder how much of that is rooted in a certain type of masculinity, but then also like some of the ideologies that are kind of going around at the time. I'm thinking specifically, me and one of my followers was talking about Fanon,
Mm-hmm.
and his like insistence on like there needing and having to be a certain amount of bloodshed in order to enact any kind of change. At least when you're looking at Wretched of the Earth, and I think it's like somewhere right up in here, but I see my homie Bookish Bohemian. What's the one that you sent me, or the phenomenon that you sent me? But we were trying to figure out where we should be critiquing like that idea, and that kind of sounds like that because then you're measuring it by how much violence you have allowed to be
Mm-hmm.
inflicted on your person and the community that you're serving. And we were like flabbergasted. We were just like, we just don't want it to be that way.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
We couldn't get to an answer. And thank you, Black Scholar just put it in there. Black skin, white mask. That's absolutely the one I was thinking about. Um, but yeah, you're really touching on that, and I think I don't think there's a cookie cutter answer to which one is more so responsible, because then because Doris is doing the same.
Right.
She's making that play on it, right? So I don't know if you necessarily attribute it to that, but more so like I don't know, like the prevailing ideal at the time, right? About what makes you tough.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't. There. I try not to present any sort of judgments on or like um my value or anything on a lot of the stuff in the book. It's sort of like, this is what happened.
Mm-hmm.
I can't, it'd be easy for me at, 36 to sit back and talk about what these 21 year olds were doing. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I can't, like sometimes it's just there. That's just what it was. Like to me, that's just how I feel. Like that's just what it was.
Mm-hmm.
I can't, I go back and forth on it. Like I go back and forth. Like I don't generally use the word activist, because it sometimes can feel like, what is the line between, movement work and activism? What's the
Yeah,
line? Where do you stop? Where do you stop just being somebody who's like trying to get us free to you're a capital A activist? Like they'll
mm-hmm.
sort of muddle the conversation in a way that's just like, just do something, like sort of like same thing with on the other side, same thing is like, I don't think I use the word racist a lot in the book. It's like, I don't care if you are what's the line between perpetuating white supremacy and being actual racist?
Yeah,
Like how many times you gonna say the N word before when you cross over to the, what I'm saying, to the next,
yeah,
so it's just like, are you actively perpetuating white supremacy? Yes. Like, don't do that. What I'm saying? The same way, like as men, how we perpetuate the patriarchy and all that stuff. Like, I don't consider myself a misogynist, but I'm in here contributing to patriarchy, definitely. What I'm saying? So
yeah, yeah.
I label myself. We got to work on getting us all better.
Word, word. So also too, if you guys have any questions, you know how to drop them in the question box. What we got you for about an hour. We
Wherever you
just put,
hanging out, man. Whatever we got.
all right, but yeah, yeah. If y'all got some questions,
Part.
'cause I know I've seen a whole bunch of homies pull up that probably got some dope questions for you in the chat. So in the chapter God and Fear,
Mm,
a voice shouts out during the conversation with MLK and others that there's not enough space in the room for both God and fear. This had me thinking about the assertion that there are only two emotions, love and fear, and everything else is a derivative of the two. And your father recounts this as a driving out of the remaining fear in his heart about risking his life and his future. He says he rejected fear and chose God and was ready to meet him on the front lines within the 24 hours. What do you think is the underlying meaning of that scene in general, right? Because you got so many dynamics kind of going on there. You have MLK in there. Um, Lewis is in there. I think CT Vivian's in there. So many stalwarts are in there, and then you have these other folks, these young people who are kind of coming in. What do you think is the underlying meaning of the importance of the frontline workers in that scene and the iconic figures like the Big Six?
Yeah, it's really, that scene is really obviously Dad's sort of baptism and
Mm-hmm.
where he felt fully immersed in it. And it's really about, like, that was what he thought his role was. You
Yeah.
know, he looked at his role and he said, all right, my job is to get on that bus and die for this movement.
Yeah.
Like, to be a body that contributes to getting us free, but I'm going to die. And that was it. That was, at that moment, that was it. And I think my thoughts about it are like the forward thinking idea of, like, all right, then what? Like the scene with the woman who's in the line and, thinking she's going to die and all that stuff. And then she
Yeah.
does.
Yeah.
Like, so then, then it's borrowed life, borrowed time after that. And what do you do when you're go through this moment? It's sort of like, I don't know if you watch Breaking Bad at all,
Mm.
but I don't know. Did you watch Breaking Bad? Did you ever watch it?
Like maybe 2 or 3 episodes. So I'm.
There's a Walter White thinks he's gonna die of cancer and he does sells drugs and all this stuff, but then the cancer's gone and he's sort of like, all right, I thought I was just gonna ride this out and that was it. So then you have to figure out the rest of your life.
Mm.
So that was sort of what that was. It was like Dad was like fully into it, but fully into it with the expectation that he had 24 hours to live. And so what do you make of your life when all that stuff is and then the next few years of your life, you're thinking, this is gonna be my last day. They used to sing, this might be my last time every night, before they
Yeah.
went.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then you're out of it, and then you're like, man, I got a whole life I got to live, and I never planned on any of this. So that was really, tells two parts. It tells the beginning, and it also tells the part about what's next, but also it contrasts, the MLKs and all that stuff, who have a real sort of logistical approach to all of this, right? They
Mm-hmm.
a little bit longer, and they're thinking and they're talking it out like, I can't do this because I got this. Like, they are in a different sort of planning stage that my dad really was not able to ever get into.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And I think a little bit about it. I think it was mentioned too. When you're, let me scroll up to it just to be sure. But where is it? Here. That your father was instrumental in organizing the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party and then challenging, or issuing a challenge to the National Democratic Party in 1964. Is that the same instance when they tried to, how down here we have like all these like stories that don't necessarily kind of end up in the book, but where MLK and them didn't want Fannie Lou Hamer in the room or something because they were going to take those 2 seats, and then she was like, "Nah, I'm straight on
Yeah.
them 2 seats. We need all." Yeah, and so I think those type of people that were those young people that were in the room are so necessary because when you start to play in that, it's like if I wanted to be a politician, right?
Mhm.
Right now, save the world,
Right.
Akili, bring the kids along, and then the lobbyist comes in, they pay
Right.
100,000, and now I gotta kind of scratch this back. Well, Fannie Lou ain't gotta scratch nobody back,
Right.
you know. And so I think those people like Fannie Lou Hamer, Victoria Gray, I believe, like
Mhm.
all these people who are named in this book, your father represent like this part that couldn't be kind of ushered into a room and then talked to
Right.
sweetly, and then and so we needed them both, right? We like you said, like we said earlier, you needed everyone. All
Yeah.
right, well, go ahead,
Yeah.
bro.
It's important. Like I mean, these folks are in the trenches. These
Yeah.
folks were here, and they had survived. I mean, not that the leaders did not, but they were here and they had fought for this, and they were like, and to me, it was important to be like, in that moment, who are you choosing? Like the established folks, like, let's take these couple of votes, and everybody was like, bump that. We're gonna ride with Mrs. Hamer
Hmm.
because she is Mrs. Hamer.
Yeah.
Like, no matter what, we can talk about the politics and the back and forth of the what makes the most sense and all that stuff. It don't matter. We riding with Miss Hamer because she was riding for us, and that was what
Hmm.
you know. And that was that sort of that sort of power that she had overpowered everybody else in the room. Her and Mrs. Devine and Mrs. Gray, who were just three black women pillars of that time, and everybody's gonna ride for them just because that's what you do. You ride for them because they rode for you. And I think that was what it's interesting because that they determined United States policy.
Yeah.
Like they United States policy, and folks don't realize that or don't frame it like that. But that's what they did, all for following these three women.
Yeah, yeah. I see one of my students pulled up. Miss Gray is from right out in Palmer.
Right,
Palmer's is a real community right here in Hattiesburg. That I mean, is still strong
right.
in its own way. But I just thought that was something dope to shout out to one of my students I saw that pulled up.
Yeah, there's a
All right.
lot of folks came out of there. So
Oh, this is a good one. All right, so just a light pivot,
uh-huh.
light pivot from the seriousness. I can't show it on the screen because someone gave me a badge. But this is from Tracy at the Stacks Pod.
Okay.
What NBA player does your writing style most resemble?
Ooh.
Tracy has the yeah.
Well, I mean Tracy. I mean, I love Tracy because Tracy's also a Golden State Warriors fan. She knows
Mm-hmm.
those fantastic players that come out of Davidson College, or player that comes out of Davidson College. Uh, Man, I don't know. That's a tough question. Who does my writing style resemble? That's tough, man. Maybe I would say maybe Draymond,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
just because there's a lot of turnovers. Like
Yeah.
I may get kicked out a couple games here or there, but I'm going to try it. Like, I'm going to take that pass. It may be a turnover, and I'm going to try. You know what I'm saying? And for me, it's like I don't necessarily, I don't think I'm a 50-point scorer.
Mm.
Like that.
Yeah.
I think Draymond
I
might be.
think Jeremiah.
Yeah.
Okay. So when you're talking about your writing style, and Tracy, you kind of threw me this alley oop. Tracy? Who you said I was? Oh, I was Damian Lillard.
All right.
Is said my question style and my
Uh-huh.
bookstagram was like. But when you're thinking about fine tuning and polishing your writing style, you acknowledged one of my personal contemporary heroes, Kiese Layman.
Uh-huh.
You said, Kiese, you the GOAT, and you gave me the blueprint to make loving art, right? What
Uh-huh.
can you say to his influence on, on you as a writer, on you as as an art maker, and on you, as a child of the movement? Because, Kiese, of course, I know you know him, is a child of the movement as well. Um, what can you say to like his how his hands help mold you, Draymond?
Oh man, I can't even begin. Like, here's first of all, heavy and breathe are, you know, mom and dad to this book. They taught
Hmm.
how to write lovingly and honestly about your family. You know, they taught me how to, emotionally excavate things that are terrifying. They taught me how to write while being very scared.
Yeah.
Especially they taught me how to write while being extremely scared. And Kiese just knows, like, and anybody too. I mean, they just write thinking about loving folks first, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously, let me tell, and I'll tell you, I told Kiese this, but this is how much Heavy jacked me up. So he sent me Heavy, the PDF of Heavy while I was working on my proposal for this, right? So I'm writing this thing, and it's like in my dad's voice, and it's third, first person, and I'm reading the Heavy, and I put it down, and I get to type it on my thing, and next thing I know, I'm typing in first person to my dad like he's doing it Heavy, and I'm three
Mm-hmm.
paragraphs in before I realize that I'm doing it. You know what I'm saying? Like that's
Yeah.
embedded itself, in me. And, obviously the letters were incidental because I did not want to do letters at first. I didn't know how to do my voice, and that sort of came. But there's obviously a clear conversation and throughway from Breathing Heavy to those letters that, I guess it was sort of inevitable for that to happen. But yeah, I mean, I can't even, like Kiese was just taught me, I was just learning how to write. I was trying to figure out how to write. This is a whole new way to write for me. I had to write it like I was writing in fiction, and I hadn't written fiction. I hadn't read fiction for craft, you know,
Mm-hmm.
college, because I'm a journalist. I was thinking about nonfiction, like, so I hadn't really thought about fiction or anything like that. So, I was doing all that stuff, and then of course, to me, so the book, I'm a big comic book fan. As you can see these comic books behind me and all this stuff. Big science fiction fan. So I was really trying to write a lot about, or not write about, but sort of make the book. I wanted to make time fold on itself. You know,
Yeah.
um, I wanted to make, there's all this stuff about like, um, me and Dad. Like when I'm writing in his voice, you can't tell, who's saying what. And I think that's important in itself because I'm 36, my dad's 81, it's the 60s, 2022, and you can't tell who has what feelings about America because it's all sort of the same, And
Mm-hmm.
especially in the eulogy chapter, the in Ben Chaney's face, to look like to be all of these different faces of people, and I wanted just time to sort of converge into one place, and obviously as I was thinking of that, I went back and went through long division, which is time travel, and thinking about this sort of Afro-futuristic, Mississippi funky science fiction thing that we were doing. So like Kiese is all up in this book, he's
Yeah.
all up in the book. And I hope that he, that I did him a little bit of justice,
Yeah. Yeah.
embarrassing that was influenced by him for sure.
Yeah, I got excited in there when you said what you were trying to do was like make time fold in on itself. I was telling my wife, I think a lot of times people think like time is like it's what is it? I mean, I don't know what the word is, so I'll just say layered on top of each
Yeah.
other, right? And I was like, what this book is doing is it's like it's wrapped
Mhm.
in the '60s,
Right.
and then you find yourself in the center of that, and you can feel the weight
Mhm.
of the history on what's going on now,
Right.
And so it's crazy you say that because I literally was telling her that last night, and she was looking at me like, okay,
Right.
when I go to nerding out, she'd be like, all right,
Yeah.
all right,
Right.
I got
Right.
you.
No, that was how I would like. It was hard. It was one of those things that was hard to explain. 'Cause I was right, like about halfway through the book. I was like, I'm gonna make this a science fiction book, and so folks were like, "What are you talking about?" I'm like, "No, but I'm gonna make it. I want to make it a time travel book. I'm gonna make a science fiction book," and um, and I think we kind of did that without going too off the grid like that. That could have been a Draymond turnover, you know what I'm saying? But like we were like,
Yeah.
keep it, but like that was that was how I felt. Like I wanted, so much of time to just happen all at once,
Hmm.
with the book.
Yeah, I was trying to think, what is there? I saw something too recently that was about time. I wonder what's the one with it was on HBO. They canceled it after the first season. Um,
Love
uh,
Country.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Lovecraft. I think they talk about that. They in that show they were like, people think time is linear, but it's really
Right.
like folding.
Mhm.
Uh, yeah, yeah. My wife said, yeah, I just shake and agree.
Right.
Green is necessary for the winds. Yes, yes. All right, let's see. Okay, so this is from Black Scholar. How did you deal with the trauma that white Mississippians visited upon the blacks in the community?
Are we talking about like in my childhood or in the book? Or
I'll do you one better. This is a part of something that I was interested in knowing as well. So your father had lived some 20 years with the trauma of the movement before you were born,
mm,
and so had his comrades. You talk about how you were blessed to love these comrades prior to becoming aware of what this country tried to do to them.
mm,
What has the process of uncovering what the country did to these people who make up your village, what has that been like, and what were the effects of their very real war stories on your life? I feel like that's kind of getting at
yeah,
what
yeah,
what
oh,
what he's trying to get at.
yeah. It was heartbreaking, to be honest. For some of it to like know, when you're a kid, it's just like, well, that's Jerome, or that's you don't know, and they tell stories and they laugh about them. When you hear the actual stories, it's like, man, like how did these folks grow up to be my uncles, or aunt
Mm-hmm.
and all that stuff, and just chill and hang out every day, and one thing that's happened in the last few days is my dad's peers have read the book and have their memories have started to come back. You
Yeah.
know, they've become emotional. They called my dad crying and stuff like this, and these emotions have started to come back. And it was hard. Like especially the hardest thing to write was what was Mrs. Hamer in the Winona jail. Like that was just
Mm-hmm.
that was difficult. And even and actually, you know what? It was really the folks I don't know, I never met, that it became harder to look at. Uh, you know, known about Medgar Evers, obviously, Mrs. Hamer, obviously, and James Werner, but write them and see them through my dad's eyes for the first time was really difficult. My mom and I went to the Civil Rights Museum in Jackson about a month ago, a month and a half ago, and I couldn't go through most of it. You
Yeah.
know, like and I obviously I had absorbed all these images my whole entire life and gone to museums. But for the first time, I was like, I can't even look at that. I can't watch the story of Medgar Evers being killed and all this stuff. Like it was like I knew them for the first time now, and it became even more painful.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. I think again like the layering of the layering of the folding in that time does, because like when I'm reading how Cheney was driving
Mm,
and the joy, like to know that I've seen that in Chris. He's what, I think 21 now. He told me I could mention his name,
okay,
but his grandson and Chris, when Chris like, would leave campus
mm,
and speed off and go get some
right,
chicken strips and come back, I
right,
could see that joy. And then also, last time I was home, I'm from Natchez, so I went home and I was talking to my dad about the Deacons of Defense,
mm,
because Natchez is right there on the Miss Lou, so there's a lot of overlap between some of those stories. And his brother, who had been at the house and all kind of things, was in the Parchment ordeal.
uh-huh,
But
right,
like, I think for them it was just so normalized that they don't necessarily, you know
right, right,
they haven't reckoned with it. And
right,
you talk about that in the beginning. Some people reckon with it by like going as far away from it as they could, like Bob Moses, and then also some people did like what your father did, and they kind of held it in until like I go home and I mention
right.
it. And it's like you said, it's interesting, it's heartbreaking, for so many reasons. I was actually just home. You know about the what is it, the Rhythm Club fire in Natchez?
No,
So they basically, it was this club in Natchez, and some white supremacists set it on fire, and then locked them in, and they
yeah, yeah, yeah,
burned a lot. Yeah,
yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay,
yeah. So I go home and I'm talking to I'm spending time with my dad,
right,
right? And I've been taking pictures in front of like the monument on the bluff for so long. And I'm talking to my dad's first cousin, and she like, like you had a family member in there. Her name's on the thing.
mm,
And you just don't know. It's like we breathe in it. The history is just like so heavy all over
right,
the South. You probably could find these stories. I see Jonathan there, in northern Louisiana, southern Louisiana, Alabama, Georgia, Florida, et cetera, et cetera. Um, but yeah, it's just really heavy. Let me
yeah. That's why
see.
that's why I want folk like that's part of that. understand that everybody did in the movement world. Like if you ask your grandparents or something, what they did, like they may not say, me and Dr. King, I hung out with Dr. King, but I'm sure they did. I guarantee you they did something that contributed. Whether it was, 1964, these white kids came and we fed them or whatever, they did something. You know what I'm saying? And
Mm-hmm.
I want us to like open those conversations because I think once you realize, oh, my grandmother, held a sit-in at the thing, like protested this, Target, whatever, some grocery store,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
and it's like nobody, it wasn't in the news, wasn't doing anything, wasn't crazy or anything like that, but they did something, and I think that you can be like, oh, well, I got that in my family, like, but I think so often we look at it and just think, all right, you got to be doing all this superheroic, news, but everybody did something. I think you ask your folks, you should be fine.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So we'll kind of leave out with this. I think it should lead to what you kind of mentioned earlier. But there is a point where you you kind of question like where your father's been,
uh,
and then you realize that he's been dealing with something very heavy. Where he says George is now James is now Megger is now all of them. The unbreathing, the all screaming. It feels like, regardless of the sacrifices made by folk like your father, Medgar, and Cheney, there's still so much work to be done left by for us. There's still work to be done, also, by our children. I think, if anything, this is also a story of taking care of oneself in a world where everybody wants you under their heel.
mm.
What lesson about this did you learn in the crafting of this, and what lesson do you want your children to learn from the experience?
I think the biggest lesson is that, you know, we are not good for anything unless we take care of each other and ourselves and our families. Uh, we can't. 2020 was difficult for me. Like I was out here trying to write about all these folks, and I wasn't taking care of myself, my family, and all this stuff. And I think, what me and Dad did to come together and spend this time together. I mean, we spent a tremendous amount of time together. Is an act of healing that works to undo the stuff that white folks wanted to do to him. You know,
Hmm.
residual of what they wanted to do to him was to destroy his family and making sure that his children and his grandchildren did not have a dad. And for some people, that happened to some folks. Um, but I think, that's it. Like closing that loop with your family is part of that work, and I think that's essential to everything that we're doing.
Right, right.
Looks like
Well, go ahead.
they're having a party. It's like some folks have talking about they go clown, have a party.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh man, they're having a
The
good old time.
the squad, man.
Yeah,
Reggie talking about making it rain.
right,
Yeah, they always act the fool, man. We call it the cookout
right.
in the chat. Well, I'm gonna go ahead and my wife not only told me I was partially ashy earlier,
Okay,
but that I should be going ahead and looking at wrapping it up. Which, I definitely want to be respectful of your time, but I definitely want to say I appreciate you, sharing your father with us, uh, carrying on the torch, and doing your part with the writing, and the critiques and the asking of more, of this country, and for creating this book. Because, like I said, I can't wait to kind of share this more with the students, dig into some of these names that are here, that are from Hattiesburg. One of them said today, "Well, come on, Mr. Woods, they call it the Hub City."
right,
Well,
right,
surely, we, had a big part in something,
right,
and it was just super dope to hear them kind of, talk about themselves like that.
right.
So I can't thank you enough for the work you've done. Of course, infinite love and power to your father and the work that he's done, and all those names. I literally have a list of all the names that were named that I'm gonna work into a super cool post. But love to them all.
Thank you, man. Thank you so much. I'm a big fan. I love talking to Mississippi folks about this stuff, man. So it's been great, man. It's been great. So I'm glad you got, you like, I you know, we're early in the book, you know, the book coming out process. I get nervous when folks reading it, and I always want to know what they think about it and all that stuff.
Yeah.
So, you know, you found something in it that's worth it, and I hope everybody else does too. And they, you know, hit me up and we can talk about it and all this stuff, and you know, everything, man. It's great.
Word, word. Well, yeah, man. Well, to everybody that pulled up, we appreciate you. Get out there and go cop this right now. The movie made us. If you are anywhere near some of the tour stops, make sure you get there. Yeah, it's got a lot about Mississippi in there, but it has a lot about everything. I mean, Shreveport's there, Baton Rouge is there, the South is well represented there. And we know, I think what X said, everything is the South below Canada.
Right, right.
You know, you know, so we all in here. So y'all
Yeah.
go get
You
it.
and Jackson, I'll be there tomorrow at Lemuria Books, 5 o'clock, and then we're doing Civil Rights Museum Wednesday at noon. Come kick it. Those are the last in-person stops we're gonna be at for a little bit. So come out.
Word, word. Well, love and light, brother.
All right, peace, man.
Peace, peace.